Hi everyone, welcome to this interview by Core Recruitment. Thank you very much for joining us today. Core Recruitment, if you are not aware, is an international recruitment company. We do mid to senior level recruitment for exec and non-exec positions. Now we're doing this interview series and speaking to lots of different founders, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, just interesting people from the sectors that we operate across to try and get some positivity and some inspiration for those looking to run businesses or currently running businesses. Now, we're joined by two individuals who I hold very deep to my heart, who have done lots of work with us over the years. They're always upbeat, they're always positive, they're always in the middle of the party as well, which I think is kind of like, and kind of like owning the party. So it's Jamie and Cam from Little Door. How are you guys?
Hi, Krishnan. How are you? Very well. All better for being talking to you this evening.
Krish, can I correct you very quickly? We used to be in the parties. I think that's a little time ago now, but you know.
I don't believe that, Cam.
I think we definitely go to fewer parties than you these days.
I don't think that's entirely true, but anyway, there you go. So, look, in case people have just landed from Mars and they've never been to a little door, can you just tell us a little bit about the concept and how you guys got started? Jamie.
Sure.
I think the concept, the easiest way to describe it is we create venues that look and feel like people's homes. So you walk into one of our venues, you're in a world of a fictional flat share. We have kitchens, dining rooms, sitting rooms, laundry rooms, bathroom, shower rooms. And we want to give people the feeling that rather than going out to a traditional bar, restaurant, whatever it may be, that they're coming round to a party at someone's house. And that's how we've created the concept.
That's amazing. Cam, how did you come up with that?
Oh, to be honest, when we it was my old boss gave us a call. He had a pop-up going on that wasn't going very well. And at the time, Jamie and I were both working in different pop-ups ourselves. This is so sort of 15 years ago. Um, and he said, "Do you want to take the site? You know, I know you do various things." And we came in, we said we take it without knowing what we were going to do with it. And we sat in the site and we talked about lots of different concepts, but we kept coming back to the site itself and the fact that it had a fireplace that looked very homely, and then it had the corner sink that felt like a real living room, and these all these things. We kept saying, why don't we, it feels like a flat, why don't we do something around that? But what we were also saying is people had done the very sort of swanky apartment style thing before, and we just didn't want to do that. So when we convinced ourselves the right thing was to lean into the venue, we wanted to make sure that it was more of a flat share, something that really felt lived in as opposed to glossy and glamorous.
There's a cool little add-on to the story that we found out quite recently is that the original location of the pop-up that gave us this idea, that was the sort of birthplace of this idea. We found out very recently that it was a bar in the 80s that had been called the Living Room. So we were not the first hospitality people to sit in that space and have the same idea. I mean,
Wow.
for us, it became a launch pad to a much bigger idea and a much bigger business. But there was clearly someone else who sat in that room and thought it felt like a home too.
Excellent. So, Cam, coming to you first, in terms of like your background before launching the business, can you tell us a little bit about what you were doing? Was there
Yeah,
life before Little Door?
yeah. So I graduated from Bristol with an economics degree, and then defied my parents by not going into finance, and going straight into hospitality. That boss I was referring to before, I worked for 5 years, a bar group called the Blag Clubs, that were in Notting Hill. Then I went to work at Ignite Group, which was another hospitality group with Bougie and Cocoon and some pretty big brands, before working in Formula One for a little bit, and then ended up starting LD Co with Jamie after doing a few other pop-ups.
Love that. Jamie, what were you doing?
Yeah, my background, I also went straight into hospitality. Straight out of uni, I set up a pop-up restaurant and catering business. And that's actually how Cam and I met. In a very 2000 and something way, a, I did a pop-up restaurant in Cam's pop-up nightclub. I was a sort of pop-up squared for the early 2010s. But I was quite young when we started the original Yellow Door. I think I was 25. So my career beforehand was limited to, a few years of doing pop-up restaurants and catering. Um,
Love that. So in terms of like how you guys mesh together, because it seems to be like a very symbiotic kind of relationship. Jamie's doing kind of more finance operations, Cam's kind of like, sales, marketing, that side of things. Are those your natural demeanors, do you think? Or have you had to kind of like adapt yourselves in some way? Cam?
Who's-
Who's that to?
Cam.
Um, I think that to be totally frank with you, we've said this over the 12 years we've worked together. It could have gone either way. There are, I did work on the sales side of the hospitality businesses that I worked for previously, so that side maybe, but the rest, honestly, it was a bit of a flip of a coin. And then we
I
made
actually think I remember a meeting where you wanted, right back in the days, you wanted to take over the finance department, and we had a debate about it. It could have gone in another, yeah,
probably
yeah.
the best idea that it didn't. And honestly, I think where we are today, kind of now it really makes sense. But back then it could have gone either way.
I think what's unusual in our partnership, and I think is actually very relevant to the concept we've created, is I think a traditional pairing for businesses like ours tend to be that someone's quite concept brand led, or concept brand guest experience hospitality led, and someone else is quite corporate business finance led.
Hmm.
I'd say that's probably the most traditional if you were to take a sort of snapshot of different businesses like ours. I think for us, the creativity and the creation of the brand and how the venues look and feel and what our concept's like and who we're appealing to and finding the new venues and imagining what they're like, all that work has always been a collaboration between the two of us. It's been something that we're both super passionate about. And the rest, as Cam says, everything that's left over, we've kind of just split as we've gone along. Um, but I think that first point's really significant because, in humility, I think we've created a concept that appeals to a large group of people, that's distinctive and unique, but really has a broad appeal. And I think part of that broad appeal has come from the fact that as very different people with different tastes, we've created something that resonates with both of us.
Absolutely. I mean, I know I'm flipping around the questions a little bit here, but on that kind of point, I mean, you must have a huge amount of loyalty and repeat custom, right, Cam?
Yeah, absolutely, we do. We love sort of overhearing people outside a door arguing about what color door is their favorite door. Um, we have a flatmates card that we give out. I think there's probably about 700 now in circulation, which is to like people that we have vetted and that we believe are there for the right reasons, that are regulars, that know the staff by name, that care for our brand. And they are, they're the ambassadors for what we do. Um, and we've started to see a lot of sort of cross pollination of people trying different doors. We see it in the reviews now. It's like, oh, I went to this door and then I tried this door. Yeah, absolutely.
So our staff are sort of have been coming up with this sort of almost competition between themselves of reporting the most frequent regulars. So, we've got reports of someone coming back one week and then coming back the next, and then that wasn't good enough. So we've got people coming 2 days in a row. Now we've got reports of people coming 3 days in a row. I think a few weeks ago, the Violet Door team were really proud to say that they had people coming before dinner, saying they were going to come back the following week, but actually then coming back after dinner. So it's sort of like 1 day repeat customer.
Love that. What do you get for the card, Cam?
Um, you get to queue jump, which has become quite a major thing on a Friday, Saturday night. You get benefits and discounts. You get a birthday treat every year. You get invites to our openings ahead of others. So yeah, there's quite a few benefits there.
Love that. I'm sure Stuart Hills has like five of those, right? I mean, you must have the Black Nando's version of that, right? I mean, there's something like that flying around, I'm sure.
We-
And
we-
did you never think about kind of like because memberships obviously kind of like, kind of like so prevalent, like, within other, is that part of the plan moving forward, do you think?
Do you want me
Jamie?
to do this one, Kristen?
Yeah.
Um, so I think it's there's a sort of never say never principle there, but I think maybe more fundamentally, it a lot of people say, and the press often describes us as having the feeling of a member club, but
Yeah,
without having the membership. And I think for us to be able to make people feel as at home, as comfortable, as cozy, as warm, as welcomed as they would in someone's home or indeed in a members club which people feel like they have an affinity to, that's a really, really special thing for us. And I feel that that's at the core of what we're about as a business. And I don't think we feel the need to restrict that to right now, certainly to a list of members in any way. I think the beauty is that we're able to give anyone that feeling. Um, there might be a situation in the future where, for some specific part of our business or for a particular reason, that changes. But for us right now, I think it's a really core part of our identity to be able to give people that feeling without needing to charge for it.
Yeah, if I can add to that, we talk a lot internally about how important value has become to customers. And I think one of the beautiful things, well, we'd like to think with us is that you can come to a place that feels like it could be a members club. You can play games and have an experiential time there, like you might be able to do at a competitive socializing venue. It's a bar, you can have dinner, you can stay for the whole night. And you can do all of that for technically whatever you want to pay for it. If you
yeah.
decide to come in and have a sparkling water and do that, you can do. So the perceived value is really great. We're offering a lot for very, very little. If you add a membership to that, suddenly that sort of trade-off is different.
And then if you think in terms of to layer the point one stage further, if you think about, the point in the economy that we're all at the moment and the need that we all have to offer a great value proposition to customers, we feel like, our drinks aren't that much more expensive than our competitors who don't, have this feeling. Um, and to be honest, probably aren't more expensive at all. So what we like to think is this amazing warmth and feeling that you could be at a members club is basically something we give for free, which is an extraordinary value proposition.
Yeah, absolutely. And even when going in, it's like the design is so well thought through, the decor is so well thought through, everything is considered. Cam, is that you? Jamie, is that you? Who's behind that? Is it both of you?
That's the bit that falls right in between and that we both care really passionately about. I'd probably take a minute to also say I think our designers should take a lot of
Yeah,
credit.
I was
Uh,
about to say, I don't think they would like us to sit here and take credit for it.
No, they're called Behind the Doors, funnily enough, because they started with our first ever pop up and then have continued through and now do a lot more projects. But there's a lot to thank for them. But the process we go through is something that we're really, really proud of. We very much think about who the fictional flatmates would be who would live there. These are never sort of spoken about externally, but we Jamie and I sit through and go, what cars do they drive, what books do they read, what music do they listen to, everything about them. And that forms a picture that we can then give to the designers and say, X, Y, and Z live here, and this is who they are. Design the flat for them. And we make sure that each flat feels different and it pulls from the neighborhood that it comes from. We've got sort of the loft style apartment in Soho. You've got the, more eclectic bohemian flat in Notting Hill, or the preppy flat in Fulham. All these things are really, really important so that we have this feeling of going to different doors. It's all under the same umbrella, but you have a slightly different experience.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And
And
how
and
do you
I
think
think
that? Go
I
on.
think from that point onwards, we it gives us an amazing sounding board, the process for designers, because if they send us something that doesn't quite feel right, we can say, I don't think this belongs in the world of these flatmates, and it allows us to have a really unified creative brief as we go forwards. And yeah, and then I think we're incredibly hands-on during the rest of the design process. I mean, basically most of the furniture we look at individually as we go through. I think our designers would probably tell us we're too too heavy-handed as we go through the process, but it's something that really matters to us. But it's, as you quite rightly pointed out, Christian, it's a really integral part of the experience of
Yeah.
being at the venues.
Yeah, absolutely. You just look around and kind of like when you're sitting there, you're like, oh, look at this. There's always something
Yeah.
new that you kind of discover, which is a really beautiful thing. I guess as you're like scaling feels like a bit of a dirty word to use sometimes, but as you are scaling and you are looking at outside of London, and I mean, I always think that you guys would do phenomenally in like New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Amsterdam. I mean, those markets kind of like all feel like
Those are your
places
most
where
recent holiday destinations, Chris.
I knew the burn was coming somewhere, Jamie. I didn't know where it was going to come, but there it kind of goes. But you think like with those, with that demographic, with that style of person, that style of clientele, you think you guys could easily go into those markets kind of like as well. But like, I guess, what are the plans for expansion? And when curating that kind of like expansion, kind of like, what gives you that anxiety, like, about what's going to be lost? Jamie, I'm going to come to you first because Cam's got a wry
Yeah,
smile on his face.
yeah, no, fair enough. So in terms of we're very excited about being able to expand the brand. It's something we've always thought is we've thought that it's the beauty of the concept is that we create these venues that are very distinctly ours and very distinctly homes. But that each home can be different according to the area that it's in and the kind of people who visit it, the kind of people who live in that area, the cultural history of that area. These are all things that can make each home distinctive, and we think that there's actually very little limit to that. There as many places as house are what we consider to be, broadly speaking, our target audience. We think we can create something that is distinctly Little Door and Co. and also unique to that area. There's a huge amount of creativity then that we can draw from each of the new areas we come into. So as we imagine a little door in a new place, in each of the new locations, there's a huge, cultural tapestry of each location that we can tap into to work out how to make our venues distinctive. So it's, I guess, in summary, to answer your question, I think that you said at the beginning that was it expansion's a dirty word. I think the reason why people talk about that is because I think for a lot of brands, expansion is something that engenders or implies dilution of brand.
Hmm.
Um, and I think obviously that's always a risk and something we're wary about. But from a fundamental conceptual level, we feel like expansion inspires our brand
Mm.
to grow and deepen. And that's something that I think really keeps our like vitality and joy and passion in the brand.
Absolutely.
I was
Um,
just going to add, Chris, to get maybe be more specific about your question. We're looking domestically at options, and we've got a couple of things regionally that we're excited about. Um, never say never for some of those wonderful cities you mentioned as well. But it's a difficult economy, and I think you have to be wary that as much as that idea sounds wonderful, like opening in New York is a totally different market for totally different people. It's incredibly competitive. We would all love to be there and doing it, but there's great opportunity here in the UK, and we're excited about those.
Excellent. That's really, really cool. What's your criteria when you are looking at kind of like those new sites, either in London or outside? Because obviously the entrance is a major part, but what's your kind of criteria when you're looking around in location and area and floor space and layout? Because it has to flow, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have two types of sites at the minute, which we've got some that are all on one floor, and you go multi-room. We call it the Cluedo board experience. Um, we also have some on different levels where you've got sort of a more chilled floor, which could be the living room you hang out in, and then you go downstairs into the den or the games room or something like that, and that's where the party's in. Um, for us, in terms of specifics, I think we're looking at 3,000 to 5,000 square feet is probably the nice pinch point. Vertical drinking is really key for us. Um, and somewhere where we can have DJs and music on the weekend, and if for it to turn into a house party. I mean, that's um, in terms of the site from the outside and things like that. Flats can all look in different shapes and sizes. You've got, modern, glass fronted, flats. You've got Victorian houses, Georgian houses. You've got beach houses in Brighton. There's such a different array of things. But to find that with also the right license and things like that, it's not an easy job. That's probably one of the hardest things for us is
Yeah.
finding the right sites.
And I think in the past, we were very much led by, trying to find sites that fit our conception of what a flat or a home should look like. And I think we found that that was very limiting. And what we actually do now is we sort of look at it the other way around, as there are a few types of locations, I probably don't need to spell them out, but, definitely can't look like a flat or a home. And we tend to exclude those. And then actually, to my last point about, expansion being creatively stimulating, we tend to look at, sites that make sense from a sort of commercial licensing point of view and allow ourselves to be inspired by what a venue looks like in terms of being part of how we design that as a home and what kind of home it feels like.
Absolutely. Do you get approached by people like housing developers and kind of like, people who are building kind of like, massive complexes and all that kind of stuff? Because they're putting food and beverage and all those kind of things in. And, a lot of them are trying to get that sense of community, I guess, that kind of like a lot of your concepts would kind of bring around. Do you get those kind of approaches as well, them coming to you, or is it more the other way around?
I think housing developments isn't someone who's approached us. We certainly do get approached by large landlords.
Yeah.
We have got approached in sort of large sort of mixed F&B and residential developments. Yeah, so I think people definitely do come to us now. Yeah. But I would say in terms of the sites we look at, it's probably more ones that we find ourselves, but we definitely do get approaches from people as well.
But that would be
Yeah.
London centric currently.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, I guess from a funding perspective, kind of like I mean, like there's lots of kind of like news in the press at the moment about challenges within hospitality funding and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, you guys have, I mean, from an external perspective, never seem to have encountered any barriers when it comes to kind of like funding. Are all the like, is this the Fulham site where all the bankers kind of like, were kind of drinking in, so they grew up with you guys? I don't know, like, what's the secret sauce? Jamie, I'll come to you for that one.
Yeah, so we've been very lucky that since a very, very early point in our journey, we've had the same VC backers, Addition Capital, we've had a fabulous working relationship with. They've been incredibly supportive of us, both in terms of investing, but also in terms of helping us mature as a business, and dealing with some of the obstacles that come along that as part of that journey. So they as a VC firm provided a lot of capital at the start of our journey. At this point in our journey, we fund off a mixture of profits and debt. And we consider ourselves to be in a fortunate position where our capital requirements to grow at the pace we want to are affordable to us with that combination of profit and debt.
Excellent. And in terms of like future plans and scales and that side of things, like, for growing kind of like outside of London and all of that kind of side of
Yeah.
things, do you think you'll be going fully company owned? You're not planning on JVs or licensing agreements for any of that side of things moving forward?
So actually, we've just signed an agreement recently that we're very excited about and very happy about with FinCats, who are a debt provider, specialist debt provider to businesses like ours and many of our other peers in the sector. And it's our intention that as we grow with them, and the facility we have with them grows, and that we'll be able to continue funding new sites in the same way that we are now. But we would be, as we look to expand, more than London, I think we'd always be willing to look at different arrangements as, different sites and different opportunities come up.
Excellent. Cam, coming back to the marketing side of things and like the tone of voice that you guys have when you're communicating with your customers, I think you really nail it kind of like every single time with what you kind of send out. I guess in terms of like the process that you go through, I mean, you mentioned the identification of the people who would stay in the flat, which I think is a beautiful kind of concept to kind of say. But when you're putting that together, when you're looking at kind of like, how you kind of communicate with them and I guess the systems that you use, what sits behind all of that?
Yeah, so I don't the different flatmates is more something that we do with our designers. I think we have a tone that we use across the entire group. I don't think that changes, site specifically. And I think we just try to reduce that down to a really key thing, which is if you were inviting your friend over for a house party, how would you speak to them? And so you'd be welcoming, you'd be unpretentious, you'd make sure that it sounded fun. You'd probably be have a bit of tongue in cheek and a bit of naughtiness about the party side of it, all of those things, and we just just as an informality to it. And I think that's what was quite refreshing when we started 10 years ago. We took all our bookings via WhatsApp at a time where people didn't understand that, and so we try to just break down the barriers. So when the person walks through the door, they've already had an experience with our bookings team, which is just more relaxed. So they feel like they're coming over to a house. We can't obviously recreate the magic we had from our first pop-up where it was all of our friends and that,
Mm,
that real natural organic feeling of everyone knowing each other. But we try very, very hard across every step to make sure that it feels like that. So that, one of the lines we always say is that we're not like any other bar. And it's really, really important that everything we do, we look at it, we go, how would a normal bar do it? How would you do it if you were inviting your friends over to a house party and lean that way?
I
Um,
like that.
just to add in terms of the tools we use, we're very proactive with our paid media, with our social, organic socials. We use things like Airship for automations. We obviously have our regular newsletters that are quite fun. And then everything we do has a sort of tongue in cheekness to it. And we try to make them fun and witty and just have a bit of a laugh with it.
I like that a lot. Jamie, sticking with that trend and the technology side of things, like, everyone's talking about AI, everyone's talking about how you use AI, everyone's talking about how you can get a robot to do this, that, and the next thing for you. How are you guys utilizing technology at the moment, and how do you think that will come up for you in the next couple of years?
Gosh, that's a very good question.
I can jump in if you want.
Yeah. Why
Well,
don't you
just
jump in,
because we're
Matt?
just this
Yeah.
week alone, we are starting to integrate with all gravy. So
Yes.
I think one of the really interesting things for me is instead of giving out lots of pamphlets of information to people, that's going to be reduced to smaller snippet videos that people can digest and understand better, and that you can track people's development and learning. Know what they've seen, known what they've gone through as opposed to giving them that book and hoping that they've read it. So I think it's interesting to see that evolution.
Hmm.
Yeah, All Gravy is a really exciting platform.
Yeah.
It turns what could be quite dry communication into something similar, a similar experience to using a social media app. I think that's a really interesting prospect.
Excellent. Now, when it comes to the consumer trend side of things, it would be really good what you think is going to be affecting your business in the sector. And it would be also good to know kind of like, because some of the other bar companies we've been kind of chatting to, it's kind of like everyone seems to have this conception that kind of like people aren't drinking anymore. Can definitely tell you people are drinking like, all the time. But what trends are you seeing kind of like, kind of like across the piece? And what do you think we're going to see for the rest of this year from a consumer perspective?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I,
it's really interesting. It's obviously a massive preoccupation of the hospitality industry, and I think particularly our part of the hospitality industry, this idea that people are drinking less. I, I think there's undoubtedly some truth in it, but I think in the same way that we were discussing earlier that expansion can be a dirty word, right? I think we'd see it slightly in the same way as for us, it sharpens our need to constantly stand out, constantly be providing something truly exceptional, something truly unique, something truly individual, something that represents enormous value. And Krishnan, as you say, there still are people, many, many, many people who still are going out for drinks and want to engage in the kind of business we have. If there's a little bit less, I think for us it just makes it even more important than it ever has been to be offering an exceptional product that stands out. And I think what for me the cultural trend is it's less that people want to drink less. I think it's more that people will accept an average experience when going out for drinks
Hmm.
because drinking is enough in itself. I think what less than a drinking culture, I think what's dying is a culture where, you can charge a huge amount of money to get into a dingy, poorly decorated basements with rude staff and bad and expensive drinks. And I think the reason for that is because basically that's just a shit product, right? And I don't think that the market right now has any patience for consuming that.
Yeah.
And so, in some ways, I think, as well as presenting its challenges, this sort of slight cultural shift actually focuses the attention more on businesses like ours and focuses the attention on us to continue being better.
Yeah, I was just going to add is that people still go out for all those special occasions. We just got to make sure that those occasions are even more special and that they
Yeah.
remember it with us. And we work so hard at those sort of unreasonable hospitality moments and those extra little touches that we do for birthdays or engagement dues that really make people feel an emotion, not just a
Yeah.
transaction of going out. And that's the way that they'll know that, you know what, they'll come back to us time and time again.
And,
Yeah.
and I think just on that point, I think something that is significant from a trend point of view is I think we've noticed both in and of themselves and in terms of the importance for our business, special occasions are more important than they've ever been. I think
Yeah.
people are investing money and time into their own special occasions, which they aren't in any other part of their social lives. And I think that's also backed. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but that's also statistically backed up by industry research. And I think because of that, that's also meant that it's become more important for our business than ever before. It's always been an important part of our business, hosting celebrations for people's special moments, but it's more than ever an important part of our business.
Excellent. Now, Jamie, you obviously got involved in the business, started the business when you were 25 years old. Cam, you were
Yeah.
obviously 12. Like, you've been growing and scaling it for such a period of time. I'm sure that, like, you've needed some advice and guidance and support at kind of like various kind of like times. What types of things have you had to look externally for, I guess? And are there any kind of like, really great mentors that you've had? And how have you kind of come across them? So, and that's a triple-ended question, but hopefully it makes sense. Jamie, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I think anyone at any point in a business, no matter how big or small, benefits from mentorship and advice. I'm not sure there's one single topic I would say that we've benefited from. I think, there are a few people that we've spoken to who do similar jobs to us, but for bigger, older, more established businesses. Over the years, who've been incredibly kind and generous with their time and helped us when there's just something to do with uncharted territory that we're unaware of. We've also both, since we reached a point in the growth of our business when we realized that actually we had a whole different challenge, which was how we ran a business of a certain scale. And at that point, we started seeing a sort of professional business mentor to help us maybe sort of intellectualize some of the day-to-day issues that we felt or found. And we found that enormously helpful in terms of how we matured as a company and how we were able to lead as we matured as a company. And I actually, off the back of that, we ask all our senior leadership team to find external mentors that we pay for.
Amazing.
And I would wholeheartedly encourage anyone else in our position to do the same because we've found the effects have been enormous in terms of people's developments and ability to lead.
Excellent.
I was going to add that I've met a few entrepreneurs recently, not in hospitality, that haven't been able to grow their businesses, and there was a very common theme with them, and it is they lack the curiosity. And Jamie and I are always curious. We're always up for a conversation. We always want to learn. We're always willing to, give someone a call and say, "Can you teach us something new?" And I think that's really, really important. As Jamie said, at every stage, there's always something new, a new challenge. We're not afraid to go and ask those questions to learn from the experts. And people sometimes are, they're afraid to make that call or afraid to set up that meeting. And I think that can be a real stumbling block. I do want to shout out Duncan from Inception Group. I think he's been a great mentor to me personally, and to both of us of late. He's, ever since we started, he was always sort of 7 bars ahead. So he was always able to say, I've been through that, I can help you with this and that. And he's always just been a really good friend. So yeah, if he's listening, a big shout out to him.
Excellent. That's really good. Now, not every day is a sunny day in business, and I'm sure there's been lots of challenges and walls you've ran into and had to climb over and all of that kind of side of things as well. I'm gonna come to Jamie first. But like, could you just tell us about kind of like, failure is an awful dirty word, but it's one which kind of like comes up increasingly. But tell us about kind of like something which maybe hasn't gone kind of like as well as you would have hoped it had. And I guess kind of like how you overcame that to stop people running into any walls.
Yeah,
Jamie?
it's a really good question. I think on the topic of failures, I think it's a really important topic, and I'd say two things. I'd say firstly, we encourage a culture in the company of an openness towards accepting failure and talking about it, because failure isn't a bad result. It's just a way of the world for things to fail. And I think a bad result is not being able to understand, accept that, and learn from it. So we have a huge culture of people feeling open and able to accept failures when they happen, and to be honest and reflective about what we can learn from it. And every time we go through a major event, whether that is a busy Christmas season or budgeting for the new year or opening a site, we make everyone who's been involved in that write down a list of learnings. And we then every time sort of almost obsessively return to those learnings every time we iterate that process again. And I think that's been an enormous source of growth for us. In terms of actual failures, I think if I'm entirely honest, it was interesting talking to someone from Core about this. I think probably our biggest failures have been having the wrong people in for the role, and more specifically, not realizing that or not acting on that fast enough.
Mm,
And to be really clear, I don't think that comes in terms of a judgment on that specific person. I think it's very much a horses for courses thing. And Jeff Bezos would have probably been a terrible graphic designer, right? Obviously an incredibly capable individual. And I think we failed by not moving on from a working relationship that doesn't work, whether that's external or internal, in all honesty, soon enough. And I think that's held back our growth as a company at times.
well, thanks for being so candid. Cam, any experiences you wanted to share?
No, funnily enough, I put recruitment down as well. And again, yeah, it's more that I think that at times you can become so busy with what you're doing that you might make a rush decision on taking someone as well as what Jamie said, and that has always come back to bite us when we haven't, and particularly when you haven't trusted your gut. Your gut says so much to you. And I think there's been times where you've gone, I'm not quite right, but I've got so much else on. Go on, let's go with that person. And then, in the end, you probably spend much more time unraveling that whole thing later on. So it's not particularly like, it's not that we've had like one epically big failure with it. It's probably the most consistent thread over the years.
Things we've got
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah, things
Yeah.
we've got wrong.
But I think if one was to be a bit more conceptual or philosophical about it, I think all of those instances are probably a wider mistake, which is taking an easy option in a moment that has a possibility of causing a huge amount of pain down the road. And if you're in a situation where you've got a gap within your organization that is costly and time consuming right then, and you've got the ability to fill that gap soon, it can be really, really tempting just to be like, okay, but that solves that problem. But the problem it solves, it can create problems 10, 15, 20, 100 times greater further down the line. And I think that's probably indicative of a more general thing one can do, where taking the quick, easy solution is probably never the correct way.
Christian, this is where you can jump in and say we should have used you more during those moments.
Yeah, well, I mean, hoping that's obvious, but you know, I mean, you're just staring at a recruiter at the same time. But anyway, there you go. Guys, I think that was brilliant. Thank you so much for being so candid. Thank you so much for sharing the insight and being so upfront about everything. I just love the fact that you go and sit in a space and it's kind of like, you know, just thinking like, who's going to use this? And like, what, like, you know, I think that's that. I know it's not used in the marketing kind of every day, but I just, that it makes more sense now. I've never heard that story before. Now that when you're actually sitting there, you're like, oh, right, I totally get why that's there and that's there and that's there and that's there. But I think that's a beautiful part of the story. So
Very
thank you very
important
much.
part of what we do.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's brilliant. It's really brilliant. So thank you so much for sharing that with me. Best of luck. Can you tell me where the next opening is going to be? Yeah, or all private and confidential?
News will be revealed very soon. Very, very soon.
Excellent. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Thanks, Chris.
Brilliant. Thanks.
Bye.